All About Life and Death, the most complete work on Sumego ever published in English. That's what it says on the back of my Chochikun book called All About Life and Death. This is not to be confused with the famous Chochikun's Encyclopedia of Life and Death, which was not able to locate an English copy, let alone a copy other than the PDF that you can kind of find online that has no solutions attached to it, or someone has recreated a lot of the problems on OGS as well. But no, this is called All About Life and Death, and it says on the back of the book, there's like 3 points that are listed that reads as follows. Use it as a text to study life and death in detail. Use it as a problem book to sharpen your reading skills. Use it as an encyclopedic reference. And they may kind of just seem like obvious statements about what you can do with a life and death book, but no, but look at this breakdown here. I think most people, when they look at a book like this, they kind of just go through the problems like they are Sumego reading problems, the second point that it listed out here on the back. But I want to talk a little bit about what it means by use it as a text to study life and death in detail. I will mention a little bit about what I think that means and what we can do to really do that. So welcome to Start Point, the show about Go for Go fans away from the board. And I want to tell you guys that my first passion was not, in fact, Go. I had a first love that wasn't Go, though Go has dominated my life as of late. In the past few years, it's really been at the forefront of my hobbies. But it wasn't the first. It wasn't the first thing to captivate my mind. The first thing was actually the guitar and making music in general, but I really, really was passionate about the guitar as, when I was going to high school. It really took hold of me, and I loved playing the guitar, and I went through a period of time just really practicing all the time, every day, and getting way better at it until I got to a point where I plateaued. I was pretty happy with where I had gotten with my guitar skills, so it didn't really feel like I needed to take very many steps to get past where not that I'm a great guitarist or anything. I was just very satisfied with where I had gotten with my guitar achievements. And so it was like partly I couldn't get past where I was, and partly that I was not that sad about where I was. But recently I've been picking up the guitar again, and I've been trying to upgrade my skills and this is like a plateau that probably spans like larger than the length of my entire Go career. So it's a huge plateau. It's like, I don't even consider it a plateau. I just thought I would just be like, this is my skill level for the rest of my life. But lately I've been really motivated to see if I can up my game in guitar. And though I have been spending a lot more time trying to play guitar and improve at guitar, Go has not left my mind. I'm still thinking about Go. And the fact that, I started this podcast because I was confident that I would be interested in Go for a very long time. And I think that still remains true because even when I'm spending time with other hobbies, I still kind of think about Go. It's always in the back of my mind. And as I'm tackling this new, or maybe not new, but refreshed musical endeavor, I'm thinking about improvement again and how it relates to how we improve in Go. And I'm thinking about what we need to do in order to improve in music. And I think anyone who has any musical education knows that scales are one of the most fundamental things that you should learn on any instrument, unless you're talking about like drums or some kind of instrument that doesn't have pitches and can't play melodies. If you're not playing any of those instruments, you're going to be practicing scales. And for those who are not musically inclined, and I mean, I don't really like that phrase because it kind of pigeonholes people into whether you're musically inclined or not. I think it's more of a difference of whether you're musically educated or not. So for those of you who are not musically educated, a scale is just a series of notes. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That is like one of the most basic scales. It's the major scale. And it's just a selection of notes. And when we practice music on an instrument, that is one of the most fundamental things we learn and practice on that instrument. And I promise this relates back to Go in some way. But I'm tackling my guitar journey by learning some scales. And I think that the thing is that I have so much more experience with music, and I have more of a background because like guitar wasn't the first musical instrument that I learned either. I was semi-formally trained in piano. I was kind of like reluctantly trained in piano, which is why I had to throw in the semi there. So I kind of have a lot of experience in how people teach and learn music. So with that in mind, I am looking back at how I learn music, and I'm looking at right now how I'm approaching learning music, and I'm realizing a lot of things about being patient with ourselves when we're trying to teach ourselves something. I think we fall into the trap a lot of the times when we're learning Go things that we should learn them in a very short amount of time. And when we don't learn them in that short amount of time, we either think that we're not smart enough for it, or we just kind of give up and we don't really spend more time with it. But in fact, a scale, as I'm trying to practice on the guitar, it's a very simple concept. It's not like rocket science. I could teach you the formula for a major scale right now. It's just a whole, half, whole, half step. And that may not mean anything to you if you don't know what I'm talking about, but just think of it as a mathematical equation to just kind of space out the notes and select which ones you need. And once you memorize that sequence, that's the major scale. And it's very easy to memorize. It's a lot easier than learning a Joseki. But in practice, like actually playing the scale and actually being familiar with the scale, it takes a long time. You can't do it in one day. When we practice scales in music, we don't just practice the scale for 5 hours the first day we learn it and expect that to be it. We practice it like 5-10 minutes every single day, and we keep on practicing it until it becomes second nature to us. And I think maybe that is a lesson to take away from when we think about how we approach learning Go, because I think a lot of us kind of just look at a Go concept and expect to just know it within 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And then, we really try to put it into our brains for a period of time, and then we forget about it. And then the next day we don't have really anything that we learn. So the theme I want to talk about here today is about nurturing our Go and nurturing our knowledge of Go consistently every day until it becomes second nature to us, because that's, I think, one of the lessons that I learned when I think about music and I think about how people learn music. And I think we can go further than just the scales. So back to what I was previously doing before guitar. I wasn't really into it, but it was just kind of like an activity that my mom made me do, which was learn piano, an extracurricular. And I did like some of it. It's not like it was all bad, but it's definitely toward the end, I was very reluctant to continue that journey. But I learned a lot, and it really was the foundation for springboarding off of into my life playing the guitar. And the things that I learned in those piano lessons, well, the thing is, the piano, it's very, very popular and very systematic, and there's a lot of infrastructure for learning piano. And the teachers, I think they basically I mean, there's some variance, obviously, with any teacher or teaching system or school, but there are some fundamental concepts that I think that are used to train students to become better piano players. With guitar, it's a little more of a mishmash. It's a little more Wild West with the guitar. I mean, especially the way people learn guitar, it's so different in all these other ways. Piano is a little more formalized. So I want to break down, so starting with scales, how we can relate the different elements of musical training to our Go training, and how we can kind of connect the two and learn and see if we can try to build our own lesson plan for trying to improve our own Go. I mean, this is maybe something that I'm trying to do personally. So just come along the journey with me, and maybe we'll find some new insights about how do we practice our Go. So scales, back to scales. So we'll finish off the scales segment by like making the comparison of scales to what comes to my mind immediately is joseki. Because scales are very formulaic, and it's really just a memorization. It's like you understand what it is, but then at the end of the day, it's memorization, and it's practicing it every single day until it becomes second nature to you. Now, that's not to say scales are music. I mean, unless you're listening to Lean On Me by Bill Withers or like the song from Sound of Music, you're not going to see the notes of the scale really in order. So why are we practicing this stuff every single day? Why are we spending so much time learning this order of notes that never appear in real music? And maybe that's something that you can kind of relate to when you think about studying joseki. You can spend hours and hours studying and memorizing joseki, and then you start playing a game, and the joseki never shows up. It's just never like that. And things just spin out of control like right off the bat. So it begs the question, like, well, okay, in order to figure out why we study joseki, maybe let's look at why musicians study scales. Scales are... It's going to make more sense to those of you who have any kind of musical experience, but scales are kind of like the language of a certain piece of music. And by knowing what selection of notes are contained in that piece of music, you have a better context and awareness of that music to refer to. Without that context, it may be just kind of, you're in the dark and you're kind of floating around and you don't really know why these sounds are being used for this song. And so likewise, I think we can kind of make a comparison to joseki here, because joseki is really just kind of like an archetype of perfect sequence moves. It's almost like studying a pro game and you're trying to memorize the program. Like, why do we do that? Because we want to try to embody the kind of instinct and intuition and knowledge that comes from the pro game and try to see if we can soak that in. And I think there's some similarity with joseki. And I think the thing is with memorizing joseki, I'm pretty sure I've said something like this in the past, but once you know a joseki inside and out, even though you're not actually playing the joseki, knowing what is being played in reference to the joseki is very useful. Because once you recognize, oh, this is not joseki anymore, and I wonder like what the quality of these moves are, you can kind of go back and, especially in your review, compare with the joseki. Like, why does the joseki play this way? And what does it mean if we play this way in a different way? And how does that relate? Is that a lot worse than the joseki, or is that kind of the same? But the thing is that the joseki gives you like an archetype to work with when you're looking at these moves, instead of just kind of flailing around. If you don't know any joseki, you may just kind of have all these variations and you have no reference point. You have no way to really review these things in a meaningful way other than just the pure AI evaluation. So I think scales like joseki kind of allow us to put ourselves in the context and the language of what we're dealing with. And in this case, in the case of joseki, the game of Go. And one more similarity between scales and joseki that I think I want to really emphasize here: when you, as a musician, try to learn a scale, especially if you're a beginner musician, you don't go off and learn something very obscure. You don't go as your first scale, learn like the Locrian scale or some crazy jazz scale. You learn the major scale. And there's a reason for that. The major scale is one of the most commonly used scales in music. And it is also very much a foundation for all other scales. So likewise, when you learn Joseki, it's kind of like, learning these obscure scales that you're never going to really see in the music that you're going to play. It's kind of like trying to tackle the taisha right away, or the flying knife pattern, or any number of very complicated Joseki, just because you feel cool learning it. It's kind of like you learn this like really obscure scale and you're like, oh yeah, I know this like Locrian dominant scale, blah blah blah, and it's like, okay, well, who cares? Like, you're never going to use it. Like, I don't know why you learn that scale. Like, if you can't even play a major scale, it makes no sense. So likewise, if you're learning Joseki, start with the most common and most archetypical, most popular scales. Or I'm getting these confused now. The most popular Josekis. Obviously, I think just think about, anyone who is several stones weaker than you and you're trying to teach them some of the Joseki that you know. What are you going to start with? You're going to start with the most popular, most archetypical ones, because they actually contain a lot of good information. I think the biggest, the best Joseki to teach like a beginner is the one that's kind of faded away a little bit because of AI, but it's the 4-4 approach with a knight's move, back off, and then a slide, not the attach. That's come from the AI, but the slide underneath and then back off. From that, I feel like you can learn so much just from that simple pattern, like what the beginning of the game really is about. Just kind of jockeying for the corner there. And I don't know, there's just, I think, a lot to learn just from learning these kind of archetypical patterns. And I think there's a big relationship between them in scales and Joseki. Okay, so that's enough about scales. I went on about scales a lot longer than I thought I would. What other things do we do as musicians in order to train our musicality? The next thing that comes to mind, it kind of relates to scales, are other drills that help train our ears and our dexterity and our knowledge of the notes. And these things are like triads. They're kind of like scales, but even less notes. And it's kind of, it's really hard to explain and get into it if you don't know basic music theory, but just think of these as other types of drills other than scales that kind of tackle different areas of study. So triads, intervals, arpeggios, all sorts of things like that. And there's kind of dexterity drills as well. And so I want to relate these to Go concepts as well. And I will say that these remind me most of basic life and death shapes and themed sumego. So, these are two separate things. So basic life and death shapes is what I wanted to mention when I was talking about the stuff on the Chochikun book, all about life and death. When it says on the back of the book, use it as a text to study life and death in detail, I think this is what it's talking about. We don't always have to go into a life and death presentation in the book as a sumego problem, as in I'm going to just not look at anything except for the stones that are presented and try to read all the variations in my head and try to figure out what the best moves are. That is a great way to train your reading, and I'm not discouraging that in the slightest. But I think there's another way to study that is also beneficial. And just to let you know, the All About Life and Death is very similar to the Encyclopedia of Life and Death in that they present very archetypical shapes. It starts with like 4 stones on the second line in the corner, and it just kind of expands and becomes more complex as it goes on. And then it deals with it's categorized, right? So it has 6 space eye shapes in the corner, and it kind of deals with all these different variations. But the thing is that it's different from these kind of problems and your, typical life and death problems that you come across, is that the typical life and death problems are kind of random. They're like, you don't know what's going on necessarily. Whereas these ones seem very structured. And I mean, like, I think it makes a lot of sense to study your life and death in this way, starting from simple and then increasing complexity, and not just increasing complexity in a random way, but also just kind of looking at the most fundamental versions of the shapes. I think maybe a clearer picture of what I'm talking about is the L group, right? Let me ask you this. The first things you learn in Go, what are they? You learn the rules, okay, and then you learn, maybe ladders or something. But one of the first things that we teach people in Go are the basic life and death shapes. The farmer hat, the bulky 5, the rabbity 6, which I prefer to call the fishy 6 because I think it looks more like a fish. And I actually only recently discovered why it was called, well, maybe not super recently, but it wasn't until way later that I discovered why it was called the rabbity 6. And I realized that what I thought were the fish's tail was the ears of the rabbit. And I don't know why. I just couldn't see it. It was just never oriented that way for me. But anyway, that is one of the first things we teach students. We say, hey, look, these are dead shapes, and this is where you play to live or kill them. And it's fairly simple, though we often underestimate how much time it may take for the student to learn and absorb those shapes, because we have looked at these things for so long that they're just, you don't even have to think. They just pop out at you and you're like, yeah, that's a dead shape. And I mean, that comes from the constant daily nurturing that we've done in our Go studies, where we've always recognized those things and continue to recognize them until they become a part of our subconscious. But why do we stop there? It's like after that, after we learn the basic dead shapes, we kind of just say, all right, go ahead and do your like random Sumego problems and play games. We should probably take that a bit further and say, what's the next more complicated basic dead shape? What happens when you add a stone here or there? What if you move the stone here and there? What if you put it in the corner? What if you put it on the side? And try to vary those things. And I think that's what kind of Chochi-kun was trying to do by compiling these typical life and death shapes, is to just really illustrate like these are the fundamentals of life and death. And so getting back to the bullet point that I keep coming back to on the book, use it as a text to study life and death in detail. I think there's maybe a way that, which I'm still trying to discover, to study these life and death problems that is not, in a traditional reading format. So I'm kind of trying to look through the book and just, I'll give it a shot in terms of the first life and death problem, the initial setup. I'll give it a shot. I'll try to read as many variations as I can, but I just won't fuss too much about it. And then once I've kind of felt like I'm getting some diminishing returns on my reading skills, I'll go and read, and Chochi-kun outlines these in detail, like what you're supposed to do and what situations can arise, and just go through it and just try to understand everything. And then the key part, the very, very important part that I want to try to emphasize is it does, and then you expect to like normally just, okay, I'm done with that one, next shape. And then you just kind of go through the book that way every day, reading a new shape. And that may seem like you're nurturing your life and death knowledge, but I challenge you, go back to the first few pages where you first learned that. Maybe it may take you less time, but can you read it like it's it's in your subconscious and your whole being? Like, does it just pop out at you like a bulky 5? It doesn't for me. I have studied some of this stuff, and I've left it alone for a while, and I come back to it and it's still not clicking super quickly. So my new strategy here is, okay, I'm going to look at the problem and I'm going to try to understand the life and death solutions of that problem, but I'm going to do it again tomorrow with the same problem. And I'm going to do it until I'm almost bored with the problem, because that's how I would study in a musical situation. I would play the thing and I would stumble through it. I would have some mistakes here and there, but maybe sounds recognizable. Whether I'm working on an arpeggio or whatever, I could just kind of go through it, and then the next day I would do the exact same thing. It's not like I try one arpeggio and then the next day I do a new arpeggio. By the way, arpeggio is just kind of like a fancy like drill where it goes like, I don't even know. I'm just kind of like goes up and down the scale, and it's just kind of like partly finger exercise, partly getting familiar with some melodic ideas. But anyway, it's just kind of very monotonous drill that you may have to do in terms of musical training. So I'm thinking maybe this is something that we should do in our Go training as well. The other thing that I mentioned earlier in regards to these drills is the themed sumego. So I think this is kind of related, but it's like less about life and death and more about kind of tsuji and things like that, where you have a concept like a snapback, for like to give you an example of a more basic concept, or a more like a little more advanced concept could be like I learned a new one called like the raccoon rubs his belly. that one's pretty funny, but it's an interesting tsuji. And they don't all have names either, right? On all these life and death shapes that I've mentioned, like the L group has a name, right? You can kind of call that something and say like, I'm going to learn the L group for, the next couple weeks. I'm going to keep like playing out the variations until I know it by heart. And that's kind of the strategy I'm trying to illustrate here. But a lot of these shapes, they don't have names. And so sometimes I'll be able to call out certain tsujis and say like, you're going to practice this every day until you really get it. But other times it's just a tsuji that you kind of like, you can kind of recognize. But so it takes a little bit of research to find out these collections of themed sumego problems. But these themed problems, I think, can really help us hone in on certain abilities, because I mean, to the DDK players out there, have you ever lost a game because of a snapback that you didn't see? Has that happened to you recently? Well, let me suggest trying to find a collection of snapback problems and doing them over and over again. And don't just do them in one day, do them for many days, and until you just kind of like, it becomes second nature to you. And I promise you won't learn. I mean, okay, I can't promise you, but you won't lose to snapbacks as nearly as often, because once you have the experience under your belt, it's just a lot easier to spot those, and you're going to be looking for them. So I think that's themed sumego is a very good way to hone in on several skills, and it's good to review them and use them in isolation and sets to really sharpen those skills. Okay, so far we've covered scales, and we've kind of related them to Choseki, and then we've covered a variety of different drills, like triads and arpeggios, and we've kind of related them to fundamental life and death shapes and themed tsuji and sumego studies. All right, now we get to the fun part, the songs. When we play an actual song, though songs don't just come in one category. The way I learned songs on piano was there were separate books that I would always have every grade. I would have two books, one called Studies or Etudes, and the other one called Repertoire. The repertoire books were just beautiful pieces of music, and it was supposed to be the culmination of all your learning. And they were pretty much just standardized, like good pieces of music for your level. Studies, on the other hand, and I often preferred the studies, not only because of the way that they played out, but also just the sound of them. Sometimes they just sounded better to me. And the studies they're just kind of like, they're still songs. And if you were to play a study for somebody who didn't know anything about music, they would just be like, oh, cool song. Like, you wouldn't be able to tell. But studies are typically designed to practice a certain technical theme or skill, and they're done in a more musical way. So it's kind of like a musicalized drill, almost. Some of them are more musical than others. Some of them are more technical than others. But oftentimes they have some kind of theme to practice, like on the piece of music. So it'll sound very organized often, but some of the etudes are actually the most famous as well. I think Chopin's Butterfly Etude, although don't assume I can play that. That thing is like crazy. That I highly recommend listening to it. The Butterfly Etude. It sounds beautiful and it sounds like an amazing piece of music, and people love it for a standalone piece of music, but it's written as a study, and you can kind of see why, because of the patterns it uses. It kind of like tries to challenge your fingers to learn a certain sequence. And okay, I'm getting carried away with all this music talk. What does it have to do with Go? So studies in terms of music. So since they're like real musical pieces, I consider this almost to be an actual game in Go. But I want to just say that the studies are what maybe we consider traditional Sumego training. And this is the thing that I don't need to emphasize more, because everybody, hands this out as advice to just do a lot of life and death Sumego problems. But I think this is kind of what it closely resembles, because Sumego training is like kind of throwing you in the dark. You need to look for the solution as if it's like a real game, although the only advantage you do have is that there's a solution of some kind, and so there is that advantage that you don't have in an actual game, but it's like almost like a mini simulated game that you're trying to challenge yourself with. So I think studies and Sumego training kind of line up for me. And then finally, the repertoire is your actual game. So after you learn all the drills that you've done, your scales or joseki and your basic life and death shapes and your themed Sumego, and then you do the traditional Sumego training and you do all these things, you're going to have to eventually play a piece of music. In other words, play an actual game. And this is your repertoire. And this is also another area of improvement that I don't think I need to emphasize too much, because it is very common advice to actually play a lot of games. But I mean, there are some differences here in between the Go world and the music world, because no two games are going to be alike at all. Whereas in music, you're going to stick with a certain song until you perfect it. So there's some difference there to be accounted for, but there's also similarities. Like when I practice a song for my repertoire, I go through it and I try to work through it, and then I go to my teacher, and my teacher reviews it and says, hey, this is where you messed up. This is where you need to work on. This is how you fix it. So likewise with our games in Go, we should have them reviewed by a stronger player, or preferably a teacher, and see what they have to say about your play. Okay, so this is the kind of comparison that I wanted to make between music and Go. But there's one more area that I want to just briefly mention, and that's theory. Theory, if you don't have experience with a musical instrument or studying music, theory is basically bookwork for music. Whenever my teacher said it's time to do theory, I would take out my pencil, and I knew we would, step away from the piano. Because theory is about understanding what is actually going on in the music, and it's very mental, and it's like almost mathematical. And you're just trying to do calculations. You're trying to figure out, what this, what the distance between these two notes are, or that two note, and then, what raising this note does, and how do you build a chord and things like that. It's very technical stuff. And the thing I would personally equate this most to in Go is studying opening theory, because studying opening theory, it doesn't have the same vibe as doing drills, and it definitely isn't like an actual game or an actual piece of quote unquote music. And I think it's very conceptual stuff, and it takes a lot of bookwork and reading and just kind of trying to figure out what the proper way to play is. And I mean that's my and also maybe Endgame is also a good comparison as well, because it's very technical, and it's like you have to kind of just do math and understanding those things, and just kind of like sometimes it's good to study Endgame to just understand how it works, even though you know that during the actual game you're never going to have the amount of like brain power and time to actually calculate everything out. But having done those calculations, it's probably good for your intuition when you're playing the actual end game. Like, hey, I recognize these shapes. I remember this kind of end game. It looks less valuable than this one, so I'm just going to go for it. And I bet the one who studies end game will come out on top in terms of those things, even though they don't actually calculate things out all the way. So that is my basic outline. I mean, it's a little loose. I did try to tie these two worlds of mine together very hard. Let me know what you think. But I think there are definitely things to learn from the world of musical training, because, hey, I mean, although Go has been around for so long, it's still kind of a pretty niche thing, and especially in the West, we don't have a lot of material to go off of. Whereas in music, I mean, no, everyone's heard of what a piano is. Like, even the 3-year-old knows what a piano is. You grab any 3-year-old off the street, you'll be like, "What is that?" And they'll be like, "A piano." Or maybe I'm overestimating 3-year-old intelligence. I don't know. But anyway, that's all I had for the musical Go comparison. Thank you for sticking with me. Go Magic is probably the best Go resource out there on the internet behind Sensei's library. It is a wonderful and super polished platform for learning Go. If you haven't checked it out, you should go check out and just take a look at the site, because it's really well done and there are a lot of great lessons. And I think the thing is that they spend so much time on the UX. I come from a UX background, and I think they just do such a great job in presenting all the materials. It makes it just that much more enjoyable to consume Go content. And they have all sorts of lessons for all sorts of levels. So go check out gomagic.org if you're interested. And for your very first purchase, you can use my code STARPOINT to support the show and also get 25% off that first purchase on gomagic.org. So after all these funky comparisons that I made between musical training and Go training, I think the basic lesson that I still want to emphasize and take away from all this is about being patient with ourselves when we learn the game of Go, because it's a very difficult game to learn. And I think music and Go are similar in a lot of ways. Actually, guitar, my guitar players out there, you know what I mean when I say that a D chord is just a tiger's mouth. They're a lot more alike than people may expect, because the guitar neck is really just a grid of 20 plus divisions one way along the neck, and then 6 strings. So it's like a 6 by 20 something grid, and then there's points all over the neck that mean things. Just like in Go, a 19 by 19 with all these points on the board that mean things because all the relationships they had with each other. So, I mean, but that's just kind of a superficial thing. I think the important relationship I want to emphasize is that when you're learning something as complex as Go or music or whatever you're learning, whether it's sports or as like an athletic endeavor, artistic endeavor, or any other kind of self-improvement, we should take it day by day and not expect us to learn things in a flash. Because I know that when I have tried to teach music to other people and when I've tried to teach Go to other people, they take a while to get the basic first few concepts. And so if it takes a while for people to get the basic first few concepts, what makes us so sure that taking in next level concepts should be easy? No, it's going to be harder. It's going to take even longer than the first concepts that you learned. So you should spend more time with them and slowly. I mean, it may be frustrating. And I think this is something that I've experienced too. It's like you just want to learn everything all at once and just get it down in there and finally just be better. But that's not how it works, unfortunately. We have to nurture our skill and we have to nurture our passion and abilities and just have the faith to keep going and play on and do the things that you need to do every day, almost like a garden that you're taking care of. Like if you're trying to take care of a garden or a plant and you water it the first day and the next day you're like, well, why isn't it growing? And you're like, I didn't give enough water, and you just try pouring up all this water, and you're like, oh, I probably ruined it. It's probably dead now, and then you don't water it the next few days. Then you come back to it, and you're like, should I water it again? And then you try to water it for a few days. You still don't see anything, and then that's just not how it works. All you got to do is spend a few moments with your plant, water it, talk to it, let it have some sun, and then leave it alone, and it will grow on its own. And I think developing our skills like this, it's similar. And it's poetic because on the board, we are often told we need to be patient because we don't win a game of Go like we win a game of chess where we just kind of do one move of checkmate. I'm simplifying it, of course. There's a lot of tension and buildup before the checkmate, but it's still more like of an illustration in Go that you have to be patient and get advantage by advantage, and just know that every little advantage you do, every move that you make will add up and get you the game, get you the victory. And so patience in Go, patience in life, I think it helps for us all to be patient with ourselves and with the improvement that we expect out of ourselves. So just as a little word to you guys, all you listeners out there, if you're struggling with your play and you're kind of frustrated with where you're at, maybe slow down and be patient with yourself. I don't really like saying to expect less of yourself, but expect more of yourself, and be more sure of yourself in that the amount of nurturing that you give yourself, it will pay off. Could have worded it a little bit better, but hopefully the message got through. And I think if we keep at it, we're going to suddenly realize that we're strong. Alrighty, it's time for the DDK Advice Corner, and the tip of the day is don't invade before all the big points are taken. This is a kind of flat advice that I want to give out to DDKs out there. The game I was looking at, the person was playing and people were grabbing big points left and right, and then suddenly a stone was plopped into the middle of a 3 space extension when there were huge points on the board all over the place. Like, why start that ruckus? I would say don't bother with that until later. Just take it slow. Be patient. Take the big points. Take the framework and, take the approach moves and the extensions, and then maybe you can kind of plop your stone in your opponent's territory. Because what that person did was kind of harmful to their own groups and territory, and it didn't really go the way that it should have. So the tip of the day, don't invade before all the big points are taken. All right, it's time for some Go news, and I want to give you an update on the Lanka Cup qualifiers for North America. Ryan Lee 4P swept both Alex Chi and Michael Chen to clinch the first North American rep slot for the second Lanka Cup later this year. And then the third round qualifier will be held on March 12th, which will have happened for you guys. So I'll update that. I'll update you on that next week. And then the 2024 NAGF Pro Qualification Tournament has been announced. So if you're a very, very, very strong player in North America, the deadline to apply is March 31st. So go to the usgo.org, the AJA website, for more details on how to get an application through to see if you can become a pro in the North American Go Federation. And this time the tournament's going to be held at College André Grasset. Sorry, my French is terrible. Montreal in Canada. So then that's going to be on June 16th to 21, 2024. And again, the deadline for applications for that is the 31st of March. So coming pretty soon. And they're going to announce more details on the qualification tournament in April. And the 48th Kisei has finally come to a close. I know it already had come to a close by the time you listened to the last episode. But if you are still out of the loop here, Ichirikiryo has taken and defended the Kisei title in a very close set of 7 games. it was just 4-3, and it was neck and neck the entire way. It was never, no one player had a lead of more than one game in the entire series. And so Ichiriki Ryo, congratulations for defending the Kisei title. Let's see if next year Yamayuta can challenge again and take the title from him. Is the final piece of Go news I have for today here is that's Choi-jung won the Senko Cup, which is a world major for women. And she did that by beating Suzuki Ayumi and won a prize of 10 million yen. So that's about 67,000 US dollars, give or take. And this is her second time winning, or this is the second Senko Cup that she has won in a row. Last year, she defeated Zhao Hongyu to take the Senko Cup. So congratulations to Choi-jung. And now it's time for listener mail. All right, we got a doozy of a listener mail segment lined up here. I've noticed that Starpoint listeners, when they write in, like to write a lot. And I like that. It's very thoughtful, and I see that they spend a lot of time thinking about a lot of the subject matter that has been discussed on the show, and it's great. But it's just something that I've noticed, that these listener mails are going to be long, so just as a warning. Eliezer Aaron Kranz says, hello, I started listening to your podcast this past college semester to delve myself deeper into Go culture, and I've been enjoying and learning a lot from you. I'm an RA for college dorms, and the advantage to that is my 9x9 board has been used frequently to teach the first years. Oh, that's an awesome way to use your position to promote the game of Go. That's a perfect spot, actually, to be an RA. Okay, I've been having trouble teaching them rules as well as separating the rules and techniques, snapback and ladder, for example. One of the things I generally do before I play first game with the guys is ask if they want to experience the game on its own or make it more even with handicaps. I've found that they tend to self-select what their goal is for learning to play. I haven't tried playing Go Capture before, but I'll try with my next friend who wants to learn. My problem with teaching new players is that I'm 16Q, so my question is, should I focus on my learning before I introduce Go to others? Thanks. Well, thanks for your question, Eliezer. I hope I'm not butchering it too badly. So I think that it's perfectly fine as a 16Q to try to teach others how to play the game. I think the thing about people who maybe still have some ways to go to improving their own play is just being humble about, not knowing how to play the game and just not forcing certain ideas on people if you're not sure about them. But you have more than enough skill to explain the rules, and I think Capture Go is definitely a good way to go. I feel like in a college setting, you're going to be able to find certain people who kind of pick up the game quickly and try to target those people because they can help spread the knowledge as well. But yeah, I think, it's more important to try to get more people to play and have fun with the game than to really focus too much on yourself learning and just kind of shut yourself in and not share the game with other people just because you don't think you're good enough. I think you're perfectly fine at 16Q to teach other players and introduce the game to others. Thanks again for writing in. Pat Wish Dat Fish says, and I love your name, by the way. Hello again. I wanted to pipe in regarding some of the interpersonal psychology that comes into play with Go. Predominantly a chess player myself, I found the notion that you should play respectfully on the board a bit confusing. There isn't anything wrong with making your opponent proving you wrong, although there is something of a culture in chess that is rude not to resign if your position is clearly lost. Is there a similar notion in Go games? Okay. First thing about the chess comment, yes, I think I've seen that, where like chess players are like, it's almost like a video game mentality where it's like, you just do whatever it takes to win. Whereas in Go, there is this kind of weird air of respectful play, which I don't necessarily agree with almost all the time because, I think it's also just a game, but I think it comes from like a lot of the Japanese tradition, and a lot of people are very respectful of the Japanese culture and view of the game. And I think in Japanese culture, it gets weird. In the Master of Go, that book I always mention, there's some weird stuff with the etiquette. It's like, sometimes like back in the day, what they would do is like the master, instead, like if they were losing the game, they would be like, oh, let's not finish the game. And it's just like, okay. like that's the level of like etiquette that they had for the game. And it's like, at a certain point I feel like it's a bit much. But you had another question here. Resigning. Yeah, I think that the opinions seem to differ. I think like it is kind of rude to resign when your position is clearly lost, but and a lot of people do get frustrated even in Go when when they're winning the game and the opponent refuses to resign, because it can take very long to force the game to end. So it is kind of, it is a bit of an etiquette thing, but I think it has to do with whether the person understands that they lost or not, because if they don't understand that they've lost, then it's hard to blame them. But if they do understand that they lose and they keep playing, then that's obviously kind of rude. All right, sorry, I went on a tangent here. So the next part of your comment, chess appears to be much scrappier game for whatever reason. I would check out something called a Le Fang, which is a super cheeky move that occurs in online chess, because you can track the limited movement of pieces in chess. You can opt to make pre-moves, which is a set move that takes no time to make on the clock. The Le Fang is absolutely a dirty move, but only possible in online chess. Check out this video if you're interested. Oh, I'm gonna have to check that out. What is the Le Fang? Well, I will check that out later. Chess players often describe this kind of thing as dirty or disgusting, but in an era of appreciation rather than actual apprehension. I'm gonna have to. It sounds like a time suji, what you're describing, like similar vein. Time sujis are kind of dirty, to be honest, but like it's part of the game. Like you can't rule it out. Like you have to be able to play a time suji. Okay, thanks for writing in. That was really interesting. Kit has written it again. Hello, Kit again. Hi, Justin. I've got a couple of ideas for future episodes to share with you. One is something you've touched on often, but I think could benefit from an episode of its own, which is the emotional journey of learning to play Go and what we learn about ourselves in the process. How it feels to lose a lot at first, the feelings of shame and embarrassment that can come from being publicly bad at something, the qualities like determination, humility, etc. that you can find through carrying on. Even maybe stuff like what's going on for people who get into sandbagging and so forth. A bit of armchair Go psychology. I feel like you're speaking from experience here with some of this stuff. I'm gonna have to dig deep into my well of Go experiences, because I think this is a great topic. Actually, I will have to pocket that and definitely consider this for a future episode. Thanks for the suggestion. Kit has more to say. I think learning Go is helping me in a lot of these areas. I've always been because it's great. I was curious about the stories that you're going to share. Sorry. I've always been very afraid of others' criticism and ridicule, and I've struggled to show anyone my writing or play music in front of other people, try addressing native speakers in languages that I'm not fluent in. Oh, hello, fellow musician. It's great to see that there's a musician out there who will, not be totally lost in this episode. Even if logically I know that I'm just as good as these things as many people who do them without concern. Playing Go can bring up the same feelings of shame, especially when I know that better players who are putting time into helping me are looking at games in which I make ridiculous mistakes. I can start obsessing about the idea that they must think I'm an idiot. But I'm learning to stick with it and tolerate the discomfort in a way which I think could help me in other areas of my life. Well, I'm really glad that Go is a way for you to overcome some of these challenges. And I think we all kind of, experience some level of these kinds of thoughts where we're kind of insecure about, what the other person might be thinking of us. But man, they really shouldn't be thinking that you're an idiot. So I feel like, it's just a game, and it's if anyone kind of gives you that vibe, I feel like it's just not cool. It's not cool. The game should be about humility. The game should be about, if you're stronger than the other person, you should be treating them with respect, even though you're better than them at the game. And you should treat them like a potential student and be very nurturing to them as a person who has more experience. And if you're someone who is not as good as somebody else in the game, then you should be humble and respect that that the other player is stronger than you, but there's no need to call anybody an idiot when we're playing Go. So, you know, I'm glad that this game is helping you through some of these emotions. Kit has another paragraph. Similarly, I have had a tendency to give up on things quickly, to only enjoy doing something when it's easy and drop it as soon as it requires some effort. Go definitely feels like an exception because I think I am not naturally gifted at it. I'm terrible at Sumego, for example. I stare at very simple ones for ages sometimes and just cannot do them, even though they're meant to be for beginners. But despite the odd moment of despondency, my motivation to keep learning is still strong 3 months in. I'm proud of myself for that, and it's giving me a bit more faith in my ability to persevere. I'll save the other idea for another week. Thanks a lot for continuing to make the podcast. It's a weekly treat for me. Also, I want an update on how the podcast is doing. How many regular listeners do you have now, and how is it feeling for you to be doing it? All the best, Kit. Well, okay, there's actually a few things to tackle here. So the first thing was I wanted to also touch base here on the comment about Go being an exception, because I totally relate. As you can tell by the stuff I've covered in this podcast, like I have like a wide variety of hobbies, and I felt always like a jack of all trades, master of none type of person. But Go was like something where I was like, you know what, I want to stick with this one. I want to like really like dig my heels into this one and try to see if I can get somewhere. And it's just been like, I don't know why we Go, but it's awesome because I feel like you know, we're similar in that way. And then oh yes, I just want to appreciate that, you know, anyone who says that, you know, they enjoy listening to the podcast is always it's always nice to hear. And to answer your question on how the podcast is going, I haven't really looked at the numbers too much in detail. It's like you know, it's still kind of in the few hundreds of listeners, but I feel like, you know, there's some regulars here that really enjoy listening to the podcast, and I think that's what matters to me, is that there are people who enjoy it and people who enjoy listening to the podcast on a purpose. It serves a purpose for those people, rather than the growth. But it is like growing very, you know, at some rate. I don't know. But thanks to everyone who has joined me in this journey, and through all those binge listeners out there. Like, I can't believe people like it. To me, it's like I'm just in this room by myself, rambling, and to think that people are enjoying that it's actually kind of a funny thing. And like, it's just, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely rewarding. Let's put it that way. It's rewarding. Let's see if I can keep putting the work in. I'll try to have grit in doing that, because I know it is providing some entertainment and Go content for a lot of you. So thanks for writing in, Kit. Thanks for those questions. Next listener mail write-in was from Michael. Dear Justin, I found your podcast recently and I've been binge listening whilst making dinner every evening. I've just listened to your episode on Go books, and I wanted to share a couple of books that have been very important to me. The first one is a novel that introduced me to the game, The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu. I've heard of this one, and I've like heard of this as like in an article where it was just like mentioned as one of the classic pieces of literature that mentions the game of Go. Michael has to say, it was written pretty much exactly 1,000 years ago in Japan, and the courtly society it describes could hardly be more foreign to a 21st century Westerner. Characters talk to each other from behind screens, judge one another's moral character by the quality of their calligraphy, and spend days stuck in their houses because it happens to be bad luck to travel east that week, and east is the direction they need to go in to get to the Imperial Palace. Yeah, I mean, you think that they're strange back then in this particular place. Imagine people reading about us now. I'm sure there are a lot of things to be weirded out by. But it sounds like a really interesting piece of literature. The book is one of those great works of art, however, that can speak to us clearly about the human condition, even across such cavernous differences in time and culture. Yes, well said. Among all this, a couple of chapters feature games of Go, and discovering that this game was still played in an essentially unchanged form made me eager to learn more about it. I've been hooked ever since. That is an amazing way to learn about the game of Go by reading The Tale of Genji. Wow, that's crazy. I love that. The second book is more practical for Go players and taught me a lot. Opening Theory. Oh, sorry. This is a second recommendation for a Go book by Michael. Opening Theory Made Easy by Otake Hidero. I got this book as a 20Q player and it really helped me improve to about 10K. Each chapter takes on a simple-ish principle and demonstrates it through clearly explained examples. Yes, this is one of the most popular recommendations. I'm surprised I don't have it in my library, and the thing is, I don't have it in my library right now because I'm trying to hold back on buying yet another Go book. But I know this is one that I like, and I do recommend this one because I flipped through it and it's good stuff. What I really liked about it was that it doesn't overburden you with too much information. I can read any chapter that sounds useful, say don't permit a Hane at the head of your stones, and then try to apply the lesson in my next few games. It worked wonders, and now my opening is much better than the rest of my game, and I've plateaued at 10Q. But I'm looking forward to trying some of your book recommendations and your earlier advice about self-reviewing games in order to progress further. Keep up the good work. Your podcast is so thoughtful and so relaxing that I just love it. Yours, Michael. Thank you for the very, very kind words, and good luck with that. Let me know how that goes. I think opening study, if you haven't done it, it's definitely something that can up your game for sure. But then at a certain point, it's like it kind of the returns diminish. Thanks again, Michael, for writing in. And then we got Martin writing in again. Hey, Justin, nice episode as always. Just wanted to comment on the 9x9 board. I have seen chess players playing Go on a chessboard using chess figures as Go stones. This actually works because a chessboard has 8x8 fields or squares, which is 9x9 grid points. It is super confusing to look at. Still, if you want to convert a chess player to Go, you can use even their equipment. Anyway, I'm happy you still make an episode every week. I enjoy your podcast very much. Greetings from Spring Lake, Austria. Martin. Thanks again for writing in, Martin. I have heard of that. I've never actually done it and used chess pieces to play Go. It does sound pretty awful, and it would be a last resort for me, but that's funny that we can use their equipment to teach them this game, whereas they cannot use Go equipment to play chess. Not by a long shot, no way, because they're the two. Unless you like draw out all the pieces and move them as one unit or something. Okay, that's a little wacky. Thanks for writing in. And then Sam Rehiro writes, I liked your story about teaching your girlfriend Go and how you ended up rediscovering the rules by just playing Capture Go. Like you mentioned, I also like to think that Go evolved to the game now by just taking the rules of Capture Go to their natural conclusion and eventually increasing the board size to the beautiful 19x19. That is also a reason I think the Chinese rules provide an elegant way to play and are more intuitive for beginners to learn since really you can just play Capture Go with them until they realize that some areas will always be White's territory and some will be Black's no matter what moves aren't played. Yeah, that's also a very common argument for teaching Chinese rules as the first rule set for beginners. But I think the thing is that like Japanese rules probably, I mean, maybe not even probably, like for sure, evolved from Chinese rules because the game comes from China. But I think after a certain point, I think everybody typically prefers Japanese rules because it's just so much easier. And Chinese rules has, all those dame filling things and stuff like that. And I feel like it's, most people prefer Japanese rules, but it could be a useful tool to start with the Chinese rules. I have been recently trying to teach my dad to play Go on a 13x13. I don't have a 9x9, but I thought 13x13 is good enough. And yeah, I think 13x13 is good enough. As long as they're just willing to, sit there a little longer or... I guess if it's Capture Go, it's going to be over real quick. He seems dead set on learning with the Japanese rules since that is what he learned from the beginning and he doesn't want to get confused with more rules. But I've started to realize that it is very hard to teach Go with Japanese rules because you have to also explain territory and life and death for the rules to make sense. Hopefully, I can soon convince him that the rules are just different ways to view the game and shouldn't be as confusing as he thinks they are. You know what, though? If your dad prefers the Japanese rules and already knows them, I think you should just go with it. And I think the thing I mentioned in an earlier episode about teaching, that episode you're talking about teaching beginners, is I feel like it's most helpful to bring up situations when they occur rather than trying to explain everything all at once. Try to do it little by little. And so I feel like it's perfectly fine to start with Japanese rules. But they just have to understand the concept of like territory. I feel like that is like, this isn't fenced off yet, so you have to close it off. That thing is like the thing that always gets posted on Reddit. I'll probably do a whole episode on that one day. One last thing. I noticed other people in the comments had mixed opinions on playing your best against complete beginners. From my experience, I usually feel that the people I teach the game to want me to try to beat them. I have found that for some people, this even motivates them to learn more so that they can one day beat me. I should probably mention that I'm only 12Q, so when I give 9 stone handicap on the 13x13, I still have to be careful not to mess up and lose, even though I usually end up winning by a decent margin. I did lose one game though when I taught my cousin for the first time. To his credit, he did seem to grasp the basics like capturing and making eyes very quickly, and also had some good reading skills from being a strong chess player. Do you think that there are ever times when playing your best against beginners could be appropriate? I totally think that there are situations when playing your best against beginners would be appropriate. I think it entirely depends on the person. I think that's something I emphasized in that episode, is that you have to teach the person. You don't come in with like a strict procedure for teaching Go. You have to look at the person that you're teaching and what would suit them the best. If you think that motivating them with like strong play would be the best, and if they're just constantly telling you to come at me, bro, then you should try to beat them. So I think, yeah, it's your judgment, I think, at the end of the day. Whereas if you're playing against my girlfriend, you're gonna want to let her win, because she's gonna throw a tantrum. Oh, she's gonna kill me. All right, so Lauren Swivelton writes, thanks for sharing your Go teaching experiences and insights. I've taught a few people how to play Go so far, sometimes starting on the 19x19 and other times on 9x9 or DIY printed 7x7. Very cool. I've never tried 7x7. Okay, we usually start with the concepts of capturing and liberties, as well as, which seems fine, but perhaps a mistake in hindsight I often make was always playing at my full strength against them in Capture Go, or simply Go, whether with or without handicap, undoes advice of their choice, maybe, because I was under the impression that one should give the game their all the time in respect to the opponent, and worried about coming across as being manipulative if I try to lure beginners into the game by intentionally playing poorly. Alright, let me finish the comment before I say anything. However, perhaps I should view them just as learners instead of opponents at that stage, and give them teaching games. As for the manipulative aspect, now that I think about it, the idea of teaching itself may already be trying to get them into the game, so maybe I shouldn't worry about it too much. Alright, I think you kind of reached your own conclusion here, and yeah, it's not manipulative unless you really throw on the act and say, oh, you're so talented. I can't believe you beat me, a player who's been playing this game for years. Oh my goodness, you're a genius. That may be a little manipulative and dishonest, but come on, like, you're gonna have to take it easy on them, and they're gonna smell, something fishy. They're gonna be like, you pulling my leg over here, and you can kind of just be like, yeah, I'm just trying to teach you the game. You want me to try my hardest, and if they really want you to, then go ahead. But I think, certain people will appreciate you taking it easy on them. I don't think it's very fun to, whip out the advanced Joseki on a 30 or 20 plus Q player. I don't think that's valuable to anybody. I think you should definitely view it as a teaching experience rather than a competitive experience. But very interesting topic. Thanks for writing in, Sir Lauren Swivelton. Gideon has a quick request. Would like to see an episode on how to start a Go Club or Go Club activities. I would do an episode like that if I knew or had experience with that. Maybe I should go to Mission Viejo again and visit that Go Club and see how they're doing and get some ideas for that episode. Thanks for the inspiration to check out a Go Club, Gideon. And then finally, sorry, it's been a long listener mail section. I love the listener mail, so thanks for sticking with me through this. My goodness. Kayepsel337 says, great episode. By the way, these people are talking about the teaching Go to beginners episode, if you haven't noticed by now. Great episode. First of all, sorry for making you pronounce my name again. For reference, oh my goodness, I should have read this first. For reference, it's Capsele with English pronunciation. Capsele. I've taught a lot of people, and I'm glad that I don't have much to add to this episode. On adapting your style to the student, I would add that it's not just about visual versus kinesthetic, etc., but also about the pace, and if they want you to explain the right moves, or if they want to figure it out themselves by playing. Some want to know about the history and culture of the game and want you to teach them all those fancy Japanese words. Others don't care and find it distracting. You sound like a seasoned veteran at teaching the game. I think these are really good points. And I never even thought about the whole history and culture thing. I'm sure a lot of people, that's a big draw to the game to them, and others it's a turnoff, right? Like that's such a good point. Definitely something to consider. Also, on letting them win, I can easily come off as condescending, or they might feel cheated if you lower your level purposefully. Someone let me win when they showed me shogi. My disappointment was immeasurable and my day was ruined. On the other hand, you cannot crush them either. To get around this, I just tell them when I make an instructive bad move that they can punish. Like playing those common second line mistakes. That way they also don't copy your bad moves. If you feel they get the hang of the game, you can also make slow move mistakes and tell them, I just made a mistake by not making any points with this move. Now it's your turn to grab as much territory as you can. Yeah, this all this stuff, it just demonstrates how creative you can be with your teaching process when you play the game. I think another way to play is like the undo method, where like you kind of play, you're not doing like 30 move reads or anything, but you're just kind of playing like a normal person would, and then you would just tell them, like, when they make a very clear mistake that you think it's a good point to teach them, you say, hey, like, this maybe not the strongest move. Or when you play a move and there's a very critical move ahead, you can say, hey, take your time with this one because there may be something here. So there are a lot of ways to approach different types of players. Continuing on, when suggesting to play a handicap game, make sure to give context. I always tell them that it's part of the game and that I take a handicap against stronger opponents too, and that they should feel proud if they can beat me with 3 stones on a 9x9 board. There's no shame in taking a handicap at all. If they still don't want to play handicap, then that's also fine, of course, but at least it's an informed decision. These are all really, really good points about teaching the game of Go. Like, I think maybe we just kind of stop at oh, do you want a handicap or not? And you don't explain, like, this is like literally used in professional, like, original Japanese, like, ranking systems where they played with handicap. And like, this is how you play the game to a lot of people. And people may not know that. It's like, oh, handicap, like, that's for babies, right? It's like, no, that's part of the game. I agree with not talking about eyes, but when they discover life and death on their own, I usually give them some Sumego. The first couple of Sumego of Chochikun's Encyclopedia of Life and Death are good for this purpose. Lastly, I understand not telling them about Ko, but it can feel very unpleasant if they get the impression that they don't know all the rules. So I just give the Ko rule at the start and tell them not to worry about it. I explain it better when it comes up in the game. Wow, I feel like you should have written the How to Teach Beginners episode. This is a really, really good, insightful comment. Thanks so much, Capsele. Okay, if you're going to write in again, I want to know, is it Capsele or Capsele? Okay, we'll get there. The question of the week. Oh, okay, the question of the week. I want to ask maybe 2 questions of the week. One is about your different ideas about training methods and whether you have a specific discipline or hobby where you can learn from in terms of trying to improve and get to the next level. And I want to hear your thoughts on those topics. And the second question is about your experiences with being patient with your game and what that's been like for you. Have you been patient with yourself in terms of learning? Have you been taking the time to really soak up the material, or have you been blazing through them through like all these difficult concepts and it's not really sticking? Or have you had a totally different experience entirely? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to share your thoughts on those questions, or you have an unrelated Go story to share, You can comment on YouTube or on the Reddit post for this episode, or you can email me directly at starpointpaduk@gmail.com. That's starpointbaduk@gmail.com. If you want to support the podcast, you can go ahead and give me a like on YouTube. Subscribe would be greatly appreciated as well. If you're a podcast listener, reviews and ratings also help. A special thank you to Chris M for supporting Starpoint. And I have a closing joke for you. It's going to be a bad joke. What is a Go player's favorite type of hat? It's a farmer's hat, of course. Thanks for listening and keep playing Go.